Welcome to the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. This podcast is designed to provide momentum in our God-given roles of leadership as we partner together to equip today's Christian leaders for tomorrow's opportunities. Whether you're a pastor, youth leader, ministry volunteer, parent, or student, we want to be your go-to and most trusted resource for equipping and encouragement when it comes to your ministry and leadership influence. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome back to another Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. I'm Eric and I will be the host for today's conversation. We're excited to be in part 2 of navigating cultural differences. If you're just listening to this episode and you didn't hear part 1, I'd highly recommend that you pause right here, go back to listen to the previous episode, because it'll give you a good foundation for a lot of what we're going to talk about here. We've got Tom Barlow with us. Tom is a former missionary, spent 35 years out on the field, planting churches, doing discipleship in France and in the UK, and he is started an organization called Coaching Cultures, coachingcultures.org. We'll link to that in the bio, in the description here as well. But Tom, your heartbeat is to help churches, businesses thrive in a multicultural and diverse world.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Great to be here.
You shared a little bit on the last episode about some of your story and how God led you and Marianne out to be missionaries. Today, we want to dive a little bit deeper about the church side of this. You did a phenomenal job of sharing for us as individuals. How do we bridge the gap? How do we build relationships with people of different cultures and different ethnicities? Maybe in our community, in our school. It's a great episode for students, especially to learn about people in other cultures. But today we want to focus in a little bit more for our Momentum Church partners, for the pastors, the ministry leaders who are listening to this. I've seen a lot of churches, and I know in your work with partnering with churches and trying to help pastors be effective, we think sometimes, right or wrong, we're reaching our community because there's a Spanish-speaking church that meets in our building, right? And I've heard a lot of pastors. I was guilty of this even in my time of being a youth pastor. It's like, I learned the pastor's name, and he's reaching all the Spanish-speaking people in our community. And so when I see Pastor Mario, I can say, "Hello, Pastor Mario," and "Hola," like "Cómo está?" Like you might be able to speak a little bit with him, but that isn't necessarily you bridging the gap, reaching other ethnicities into the community. Our church, we even did like once or twice a year, we try and get our congregations together. That's wonderful. Those are great things. But maybe you're a church that's saying, no, we actually want to do more than that. Help us make sense of this, Tom. Let's kind of dive in here. How do you recommend in your coaching, the consulting that you're doing, how do you recommend churches or community groups even create a warm and welcoming environment for other people of diverse backgrounds?
Yeah, and I know it is a struggle for so many because the neighborhoods around our church buildings have changed pretty radically, right?
Yep.
And it can feel threatening. What I realized, I guess, maybe 10 years ago is that because many of us grew up in kind of a monocultural setting, we didn't learn some of these skills of how you deal with different cultures and different people. So we're all beginners, I would say, to some extent. That's why I developed basically a kind of 3-hour workshop that for churches that starts to create this sensitivity to it. Yeah. How do I take those first steps? But where I start is with the story of the Good Samaritan. The person that Jesus told the Pharisees to love the most was the one that was probably the most different from them. And it was probably the biggest jump they had to do because it was a Samaritan for the faithful Jews, right? So part of it is cultivating this idea of appreciating what's different and to realize if God's brought those people into our neighborhood, then those are some of the neighbors we're supposed to reach. So we have to figure out how to do it. One of the keys, I think, is doing it with the people.
Yes.
Paul was pretty strong in Ephesians 2 when he said Christ came to abolish the separation wall between Jews and Gentiles, right? And I think God desires this unifying of his body to the extent that we can get there this side of heaven, obviously. And that takes a lot of work. So what would happen with Pastor Mario that you had if the two of you would have sat down and said, together, how do we reach our neighborhood?
Yep.
What would happen if people saw that up on the platform, there were people from the different ethnicities that are around your church? They're involved in leading and helping. How open are we to different kinds of worship styles that aren't the one that our church has decided on, right?
Yes.
And I know we're touching kind of, can I call them sacred cows?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's hard.
Yes.
You know, this is not easy stuff. But if we're convinced that God wants every man, woman, and child, regardless of ethnicity, regardless, can I even dare say this, of citizenship or status thereof.
Yes.
He wants every one of them to have the chance to hear about and believe in Jesus Christ. So if that's God's heart, it has to be the heart of our churches, where we're saying, yeah, we don't understand it. We maybe don't even like it, how our neighborhoods change, but these are the neighbors that God's brought, and we want to do everything we can to reach into that. And so it's going to require us to be a bit more flexible in the way we do things. And some of the playbook that we had when our neighborhood was monocultural, it just might not work anymore.
Yep. Tom, I love that. I want to highlight something that you said, and you passed by it real quick. The 3-hour workshop that you've developed, you and I have talked offline. You've shared some of that strategy with me. I haven't sat through it myself, but we've talked enough that I think I know the basic principles of what you're doing. Churches, listen, if you need help in this, reach out to Tom, connect with him, take that 3-hour workshop. You're teaching basic skills to help navigate those cultural differences. You could do it with your staff. You could do it with some key leaders. But Tom is an amazing resource to help you eliminate the mindset of the cultural differences that are going on in your community. He'll help you gain some tools that will help navigate the multiple and even identify the other cultures that are in your community and how you can bridge those gaps, how you can reach out to them. I know the key phrase you've used is, how do you move from frustration to openness? I love that. I'd taken notes on some of this conversation that we'd had before, but Tom, I think those are amazing resources that you're giving to church leaders to be not only mindful of that, but to just say, like, I need to own and understand my neighborhood has shifted around the church. I might have a heart for God to move in this community, and that might mean needing to reach different people. And so how do we be open to that versus saying, well, this is who we are as a church and it's how we've always done things. And if I'm honest, we can get stubborn in that sometimes.
Oh, sure.
So talk a little bit more about, like, what are some of the strategies that you've seen churches that have successfully done this and broken out of that, like, single-mindedness of, like, well, we're just going to reach the white upper middle class community. How do they break out of that? What are some of the steps that you've seen them take?
To be honest, I haven't seen a lot who have really done it yet. My experience is limited working with churches in doing this, so I'm not going to pretend to have a lot of experience there. Where it has worked, where I've seen it working in other situations, is where people have staffed for diversity. So there have been representatives of the community. They've had activities that reach the interest, like the areas that are interesting for those different populations. And so they do different kinds of activities, a lot more open activities that wouldn't necessarily be in the church building to start with. That's been a big one, because whether we like it or not, there can be reticence to coming through those doors.
Yes.
And so we, even on the mission field for a while, we one of our kind of sayings was, if they're not coming to us, we got to go to them. So figuring out where are those nexus points in the community where you can meet the different people who are there. Where are we going to find representatives of what our demographics are like? Who can we talk to who knows what the demographics are? Those would be some of the steps anyways to move toward that.
Super helpful. Let's go a little deeper there.
Sure.
Probably most pastors listening are like, great, we're going to start a sports ministry. Yes, you should do that. What else? What are other things that they could do to help get out of the four walls of your church and into the community?
Yeah. So one that I heard that has worked really well is a cooking club. So what they do is they'll have, based on the demographics of the community, they'll do a theme night that touches one of those groups that's growing in the neighborhood. And they'll ask someone who's like a master in that. So if it's Japanese cuisine, they have someone who can come in and whose Japanese background can show how to do it properly. Then everybody else gets to learn how to do it. And they learn how to make sushi or whatever.
I'm in.
And right, you're already talking heart language with food, right? And they're sharing something that's deeply kind of ingrained in their culture in just a very matter-of-fact way that you can ask tons of questions about. Ooh, what's behind that? Is there some symbolism in why you use that? And automatically you've got down to a deeper level of conversation than just, hi, I'm Bob, what do you do?
Yes. Yes, that's really good. I love that. That's fantastic. I've heard of churches that are doing like oil changes and tire rotation and basic, car repair needs where, they've got guys in the church that know how to do that. And so they'll open up shop for a day and, they'll advertise it into the community. So think outside the box, I guess, is what we're saying here. All right, Tom, let's kind of keep going here in this conversation. For pastors, for ministry leaders, as we're trying to reach these different ethnicities and people groups, I'm thinking and trying to be mindful of like even my former context at my church in Maryland. I shared like the Spanish pastor, Pastor Mario. How does our communication matter in trying to build those bridges and connecting? Share some maybe tips, tricks, pointers in how do you communicate, maybe even go into like nonverbal cues and some of the those things.
Wow. There's so many ways to take this. And I know we're touching on some sensitive stuff here too, because I think there are some dear brothers and sisters that struggle to say, how much do we have to bend and how much should others bend toward us?
For sure.
But we see Jesus, who was willing to give up everything. He did the biggest cross-cultural jump of anybody in history, where he left his divine world, put all of those preferences on mute so that he could then enter into our world and identify with us. So he's the example. If we're going to follow his example and walk in his footsteps, this has to be part of it. But it's being sensitive to what things are really patently American that would shock perhaps other cultures. And can we dial down on those in our communications and use more inclusive language, things that are more open, things that don't require someone to maybe even give all of their personal data before they can come and be part of an activity. Some of them might be sensitive. Where are you going to share this information? What are you going to talk about? Maybe not forcing things that are nationalistic in nature, things that are values for us that we really enjoy, but might not be the heart language of other people who come from very different contexts. Do we think about those who don't have the same means that many Americans do? So are we going to charge for an event or not charge for an event? It's a huge one. Are we going to ask sign up to be by computer, where some of these populations might not have as much access to technology? So who are we filtering out just by the way we do things without even thinking about it? And so having some of those people who are along with us for the ride to help prepare them, that was one of the things we learned pretty early on the mission field, was the more that I could do things with nationals, plan them and lead them with nationals, the more they were going to reach nationals. but I somehow thought I had to do it all. Like
Yep.
I had to be the one who was doing all this stuff.
Yep.
But if we can do it with others, that's going to help us with our sensitivity too.
I love that perspective because I think, again, we talked about this in part 1 of this conversation, but it may mean you get out of your comfort zone and you not make those assumptions that you have it all figured out. And so, like Jesus, taking on the very form of a servant and saying, how can I serve? How do we wash each other's feet? I mean, he did that. How do you, like some of those things that you look at, like I love you just kind of basing that foundation on the person of Christ. It may very much mean we getting out of our normal box of how we do church and what the boundaries and strategies and philosophies of our ministry and our impact, and going to other people groups and saying, how can we serve you? These were conversations that I remember having early on in my ministry as a youth pastor with these other churches that used our building. So at our church in Maryland, we had a Spanish church, we had a Chinese church, we had a Korean church that all used our building. And as I was starting, as a young youth pastor, I would be around on a Sunday. I'm closing up, cleaning up, whatever, getting ready for our youth events or whatever. And I'd get to know those pastors of those other churches, the ministry leaders. And I remember different times where I would ask them that question, like, hey, how can we serve you? How can we help you? Without fail, all 3 of them were like, we don't have a youth ministry. And they would tell me that because they knew I'm the youth pastor of the main church, right? And so over the years, students from those 3 churches started coming to our youth ministry on Wednesday night. Wow. So our student ministry over the years became very multi-ethnic, and there was a 2 or 3 year span I remember where our praise team, the students that led worship, were very multi-ethnic. We had a black student, we had white students, we had Chinese students, we had Spanish students, we had a Korean student. It was amazing. And so it was so fun. Like I remember, just different times, like they got really good. They bonded together. They clicked. They got to lead worship in different settings. They led worship for a minor league baseball team for the faith night. And people were like, how in the world did you do this? Like, it just blew stereotypes out of the water. But I look back, and even in this conversation, I'm like, really just being friendly and relational and asking a question. And how can we work together? How can we serve each other? They're like, we don't have a youth ministry. Could our students come to yours? Yes, absolutely they can. Now, I had to work to be sensitive to some of that, but that wasn't hard. I didn't need to make it complicated. So, Tom, what advice would you give for those who are trying to maybe navigate the cultural misunderstandings, but help us maybe think not in a negative way, but how do we put it in a positive direction?
Yeah, I think part of it is tapping into God's heart for the nations to help the people who are attending our churches to realize that this is part of the diversity and the beauty that God created that's going to be in heaven, that we're going to have people from every tongue, tribe, and nation there worshiping together. So in one sense, I want to say, let's start doing it now if we can, right? It'd be preparation for heaven.
Yes.
But it is hard. I realize that. But helping them see that, we might gain more than we actually think when we're giving to others and we're including those who are different than we are. It creates a larger view of what God's able to do. Mm-hmm. He doesn't speak just English. He speaks other languages too. And trying to tap into some of those things that are core in who God is and what he's trying to do to help people then to get a feel for his heartbeat and to want to go after it. I think that's where I would start, because I think if that motivation's not there, anything we try to do on top will just feel like an add-in.
Yep.
An add-on on top of what we're already doing in our super busy schedules. Maybe another notion is that we might not be able to do everything that the church has to do if we're going to be reaching our community in the 2 hours on Sunday morning. And I know that that's touching something that, could be a bit sensitive. But I think if we're going to reach people, we got to be where the people are to some extent, at least. And that's going to probably call into question our individual schedules and how we're using our time and what we're asking people in our churches to do and not do. But I think this is part of our dying to ourselves that Jesus calls us to, right? It's not about me and my schedule and my preferences or our schedule and preferences as a church. It's about what's God's agenda and how much am I entering into that? And so that is going to call into question some things that I would rather do another way, if I'm really brutally honest.
Yeah. I love that. You're reminding me of a story that I've heard multiple times in different contexts in churches, as Momentum seeks to partner with churches in these areas. I love that you're kind of referencing, like, let's get out of our 2-hour, Sunday morning mindset. And you referenced even that earlier, but like sometimes I think we would think, okay, well, we have a new Spanish speaking family that started coming to our service. Let's do all of our normal worship songs, but let's add in one that we'll do in Spanish. And I'm like, I love your heart, but did you ask the family, would you want that? Yeah. Would that be helpful? I've heard of colleges that even do this with like the worship team, and they're like, hey, we're getting like people that come to school. And so in our chapels, like, let's do different Spanish. And the praise team's like, I don't speak Spanish. Like, how do I? And so you might actually do a disservice to what your heart is and what you're trying to do. So go a little deeper on that empathy, the compassion, the having the heart of God. How important is that? Go deeper in the, like, why does that matter so much when it comes to building cross-cultural relationships?
Yeah, I think it's because God knows how to reach every single one of us the way we are, where we come from. And that happens in a collective sense too. Yeah. I think every church has a personality, right? But as your family grows, if you've had people that marry into your family, you realize that has an impact on how you do things. You might not change everything, but you might kind of bend some things. But it comes down to talking to them and asking them. And this is where I see the crossover with generational difference too. I think some of the generational differences are so big that they're becoming cross-cultural challenges.
True.
And so it's exactly the same way. How would you in your church work with someone who's 85 and someone who's 18, to find a worship style? So it's some of those same skills that are going to make you sensitive to someone who comes from, a Spanish culture or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
Ask them.
Ask them, yeah.
Right? Like, I feel like that's where we're getting. That keeps coming up. Is like the heart of it. Like, are you willing to have the conversation and ask them? Like, asking them the question, what style of worship do you most connect with? What are some songs? It is unbelievable right now. There are students, college and high school, who are like, we really have a new appreciation for hymns. Mm-hmm. And they're like, I've heard high school students, they're like, hey, have you guys heard this song, like the old rugged cross? I'm like, what? Yeah. Wait, what? And like, yeah, because they're like, oh, my favorite band just released this new song and it's called Amazing Grace. And I'm like, wait a sec, you realize that's not new, right? Like, it's unbelievable how, like, when you engage in those conversations and are willing to, like, have the conversation, what things might come to the surface. And it goes back to what we talked about a little bit on part one of this, is don't make assumptions. It's a big part. All right, Tom, let's keep going in this church mindset. Like, how can technology help or hinder maybe the process of building cross-cultural relationships?
Well, most people carry one of these now, right? Some kind of phone that you're carrying around. Not everybody, but a lot do. So there are some translation apps that are super helpful. So if you have a neighbor you don't know any Brazilian Portuguese like me, it can be a good tool that way. A good tool to a certain point. And if you depend on it too much, if you depend on Google Translate, for example, that's going to probably get you in trouble. So just a little bit of wisdom there. But some of those things can really help to reduce some of the language barrier. They're not perfect, and you got to check them. You got to watch out for that. You might find some cultural interpreters Find people who are good going between cultures. If your church isn't, find someone who knows how to do that well and ask for their advice to help you kind of create a plan, a game plan, how to walk through this kind of thing. I think those would be ideas that jump off the page for me.
Yeah. All right. Talk social media, website, the side of it, like maybe the momentum we've talked a lot about, like how your online presence is the new lobby of your church, right? People are not going to come to your church before they check you out online. How can we be sensitive maybe? How can you use your website or social media towards that end to help bridge the gap in different cultures?
Yeah, this is again where I would say if you can find people who are representative of your community and ask them, would you there's something I really would like you to help me with. Can you just look at our social media and our website? What are things that you would just flag up and say, ooh, I'm not sure if anybody from my culture would come if you have this on the site. I don't think we're going to be able to see those ourselves so much because we all have blinders to some extent, right? But the more we can do this in community and peel back some of those blinders a little bit, we're going to have help to do it, I think. And you can ask other churches, what have they done? What have they noticed? We have this family of churches, so take advantage of it.
Yes, absolutely. Those are brilliant. I love the thought process there. I think the number one thing that I keep hearing from people is be you. You were talking earlier about like every church has a personality.
Yeah.
Every pastor and the culture, the core values and DNA of what your church is. Be authentic with that. Like sometimes I'm like, play into that. Like there's a church that I was working with just recently, and they're like, we love our choir. And it's a very traditional choir. You know, Easter they had robed choir members, and people come out of the woodwork to be a part of the choir. I'm like, then lean into that.
Yeah.
Like that's what makes your church unique and distinct. And so lean into that. Be authentic, right? If on your website, if having a choir is a big deal, but you're trying to reach people that are from like the, I don't know, hardcore rap community, you're probably not going to, like, it's okay. You don't like, right. And same thing with culture, with ethnicities. I'm getting tongue tied.
Yeah.
If your congregation is a bunch of white people and you're trying to like draw different people from different cultures, don't put stock photo on your website of all kinds of different people.
Multinational group.
It's going to defeat the purpose, because if those people then come and they've looked at your website to like kind of get an understanding of what to expect, and they get there and that's off-putting. Right. It actually doesn't help welcome or warm that mindset of what to prepare. Any other encouragement maybe you'd give to pastors who are trying to wrestle with this? Any thoughts that you would give them, or steps that they could take?
I just coming back to that balance of we have to be who we are. You know, we are who we are. We have a personality. We realize we reach our community in community. We're not the only church doing it, right? So we can be who we are. At the same time, if we want to reach out more, where can we flex? And so kind of figuring out what is our comfort zone, or where are we okay to function in that, and making sure you do it with your people, not telling your people what we're going to do, right? What is their kind of zone of comfort that they're willing to stretch? And I was thinking about that when you were talking about music too. We're asking, say, the Spanish speaker who comes in what music they like. With someone who's of a very elder generation, are we asking them too, what songs do you like, and how far are you willing to go to allow others to come into that? It's a second question that I think can be equally powerful. So all of that thing to find what is our balance going to be in that mix.
I love it. All right, Tom, what kind of last question here?
Okay.
In addition to your organization and some of the resources that you have, what are other trusted resources that you would point pastors and churches to make sense of this, maybe to take next steps in this conversation?
Yeah, one of the tools that I mentioned in the first segment are resources that come from a group called the Culture Factor that I've been trained with. Not a Christian organization, but tapping into, I think, some of that image of God that's created in the diversity in each of us. And so a tool called the Country Comparison Tool is one that's real helpful to get some basics on how are different cultures going to react in given situations. And so that's potentially a good starting point.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who will train in cross-cultural sensitivity, so you can look up and find as many as you want to.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to do that in a specific way, kind of for our Momentum Cares family and so forth. So I'm open to talking about that too.
Love it. How can people reach out to you, get in touch with you, find your resources?
Our website is coachingcultures.org, and you can reach me at tom@coachingcultures.org.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tom. This has been super helpful. I'm sure we're just scratching the surface of all of this. So to our listeners, if you're a pastor, a ministry leader at a church, and you're looking to establish next steps in this for your community, reach out to Tom. I highly recommend spending some time with him. We're really just beginning to engage in this conversation here. Tom will be at Momentum Youth Conference this summer, so if your students are there, if your church is there, we would love for you to come and check out his power track that he'll be doing to help continue these conversations and help us just do that, to thrive, to reach people for the gospel. We say at Momentum, making Jesus make sense in a multicultural, multi-ethnic, diverse world that we live in today. So, Tom, thank you very much for being here.
Pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. We hope you found it to be valuable. And if you did, would you share it with someone else in your network who might enjoy it? Also, would you please go on and subscribe, rate, and review it? That way you don't miss any more, and somebody else will be able to find it too. Also, because we want to be your trusted resource, if you have a question or topic that you would like us to discuss on an upcoming episode, send that to us via email to info@buildmomentum.org, or you can send us a DM on any of our social media platforms. You can find us there at Momentum Ministry Partners. Also, if you need more information on our ministry, be sure to check out our website at buildmomentum.org. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you next time.